Good afternoon, I am Pete, also known as Risk for Rewards, or over on Twitter known as @Risk for Rewards. Currently got around 20, just under 21,000 followers over on Twitter, and got about 1,800 here on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, if you click the link, as you can see in the background, just click the link to subscribe. Just means you get my videos straight away. As I said on Twitter on the weekend, I'm not going to be doing any written content for the next 6 weeks, just give the brain a bit of a break. And I'll also be coming back on the racing. What I mean by that is obviously just covering less of it, just giving myself a bit of a break and a freshen up. It just seems like a really good time to do it. And obviously it's a summer holidays, so at the end of the day you've got the good weather, you may as well be out and about in it. And I will put the odd selection up here and there, but I will try and get at least one or two videos out every week. But obviously they will be through YouTube, so if you're not subscribed, if you click the link, it just means it comes up on your phone or on your TV or whatever when I post a new video like this today. So today we are here to cover one race and one race only. We're going to cover it very similar to the way I did the Grand National preview. I'm going to go from outwards in, so the biggest price to the shortest price, covering every runner with a small amount of form, try to be as precise and as quick as possible on each horse and my opinion. And as always, I'm not going to sit on the fence, so if you want to come at me at whatever time it is, say 4 o'clock on a Saturday, and say you said that couldn't win and it won, it is what it is. I'm not going to stand there and go, oh well, I really don't think that could win, but it may well do, because that's just not what I do. So I'm not going to obviously waste too much time. We're going to get straight into it. I'm going to cover each runner. I'm going to give you a rundown in the betting. I'm recording this on Tuesday afternoon, so at the moment all we have is the current entries. So we have 15 horses currently entered, ready for Saturday's racing. It's currently dry today, but we are due rain steadily through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There may be a little bit of a downpour on the Friday, but we're not 100% sure. Currently, the ground currently at Ascot is good to soft, so a little bit more rain towards the end of the week and we could end up on soft. But in reality, obviously with a few dry days and a bit of rain here there, it wouldn't surprise me if we end up on good to soft, unless obviously they water, because they just love watering on these tracks at the moment. Before we start, just going to do a very quick something, just because I read it this morning on the best, this is the undisputed best, the GOAT, Hugh Taylor's tipping column. So Hugh Taylor, without doubt, is the best day-to-day tipster. You can argue it, but I'm not saying you will be wrong, but you probably are wrong. His stats, his profits, his column, everything's backed up for the last 15 years he's doing it. If you have a look at his column today, just have a read. Obviously today is Tuesday. You have a read of his column. He's got his selections, but at the bottom he's put quite a big spiel from where he's been speaking about over the last 2-3 months, where his results haven't been that great as in through, and he's gone into, I'm not going to spoil it and say what his reasons and stuff are, but it's very interesting to read, because there are an awful lot of punters, myself included, like things like Royal Ascot. There was a lot of things where you just could not get your head round, where we had, say, 4 weeks of rain at the start, then we had like 2 weeks of Royal Ascot was just scorching heat, the form book got thrown out the window, and it's still adjusting even now, and some results are very hard and difficult to understand based on, because the form's mixed from before, so it's still settling down again, which is why, another reason why I throttled back my stakes and also the amount of bets I was having after Ascot. But it just shows that if you actually read someone who's actually a professional and he explains it through to you, it's just really, for someone of his level and his stature, he doesn't need to explain himself to anyone at any point, for someone who's as good as what he does. But it's very interesting just to read. So that's on Hugh Taylor's column on At the Races, just if you wanted to have a read. It's just very interesting. Well, I thought it was very interesting. Anyway, on to the King George. For those who don't know, the King George is one of the most prestigious races, ran at Ascot every year. It had a incredibly good reputation for big battles throughout its time, and then over the last few years it's been a little bit flat. And then people were saying, because it's too close, you have like things like the Irish Derby, then you've got Goodwood coming up the week after and stuff like that, that it's because of the congestion that you end up losing. You end up getting a fairly small field between the Coral Eclipse, the Sussex Stakes and things like that. But this year it looks like it could be one of the best races, not just this season, but it could be in 4 or 5 years, if they all turn up. Obviously they won't all turn up. I'm not under any illusion on that situation. All 15 runners will not run. We will probably likely get maybe around 10, but that's not to say that we won't get the best 10 in the market. So just to go back on again with a reflection, a little bit of an introduction with just a few things. So if we look back at some of these races, like winners of this were Mishrif, Adiyar, Enable won it twice, Poet's Word, sorry, Enable won it 3 times. Highland Reel. These are basically, if you win in this race on Saturday, you're a very good horse. So the chance of you having like I'm not saying an upset won't happen, but if you do have an upset, the chances are that horse is just better than what everyone has seen so far. So there's not very much chance that you're just going to get some yoke who's just going to go and steal it from the off, like we do get sometimes in the derbies. But I will go through a few stats later on towards the end of the video when I give a bit of an opinion. So the way I'm going to lay this out is I'll give you a small line on each horse's form, and then I'm going to go straight into my view and if they've got a chance, if they haven't got a chance, and how I believe their price, whether it's right, wrong, and how I think it will move throughout the week. So, right, if you're flicking across because you can't bother listening to the first 5 minutes, this is where the King George preview begins. So, start from the outside in, and we've got Point Lonsdale. Point Lonsdale is currently trading around 100 to 1, beaten 10 lengths last time behind Emily Upjohn and Westover. Fairly unexposed horse still as a 4-year-old, 100 to 1 for a reason. You would question one whether he'll show up, and if he does, has he really got the form to play against the majority of these? My view is simply no, not on what he's shown so far, and it's not like he's unexposed. Like, he was well beaten in his 3-year-old behind. He was better in his 3-year-old, to be honest, than he was this year. And although obviously he's come back and he's had a couple of victories, beating the likes of Visualization is not quite up to the likes of Emily Upjohn. It's hard to know with O'Brien, will he be put in here as a pacemaker? But as I go further through, I think there's other horses. He's only had one try at 12 furlongs, and he was fairly well back late on. He went from 6 to 1 into 7 to 2 on the day of the Coronation Cup. So the money was there, but the question mark would have been, was it because of the fact that the doubt with the money for towards Westover when Westover was drifting, and the same with Emily Upjohn. They ended up going. Westover was about 6 to 4, ended up going 2 to 152. So simply, me personally, even though it's only his second time at the trip, he's not at this level. Hamish absolutely scrambled home last week from scriptwriter at 4 to 9 favourite over just short of 2 miles. He was at the 14 furlongs at York. He has got form where he has beaten Hookham in the past, and he has form, but they've been campaigning him at 12 furlongs has been the minimum. But you look through some of his form, and yeah, he's got form in the staying trips with horses like Kyprios that would think, okay, that's good, but not at this sort of level, like not with the 12 furlong specialist. And the negative against him is that because he's a 7-year-old, he's given weight to the younger horses, the 3-year-olds, and obviously the mare Emily Upjohn. So again, Hamish, will he turn up? I don't know. He could do, of course he could, but I can't see it. Broome for me is just simply not good enough at this level, and it would not surprise me if he's used as a pacemaker, because they seem to have run out of ideas with him. It's almost like they were shocked in Maidan when he was sent off 8 to 1 and he won the Maidan Gold Cup, beating Siskany over 2 miles, subjectivist further back in the field. Brilliant run, but he looked beaten about 2 furlongs out, and then he stayed on, and then next thing they were talking about him being the stayer. I think at one stage, in fact I'm pretty sure at one stage he was 3 or 4 to 1 to win the Ascot Gold Cup. And obviously, as time's gone on, he's drifted further out, and he didn't win the Ascot Gold Cup. He got beat by Giavoletto at York when he had little excuses because he'd ran 2 months before, and he also finished behind, obviously, Eldarov that day, who was carrying a penalty. So that performance wasn't fantastic and was £5 below his Maidan run. And then he was absolutely hammered at Ascot once more over 2 mile 4 when 15 lengths beaten by Courage Manami. And his numbers there weren't great whatsoever. It would not surprise me if Broome was a horse that they put in there to send him out and make all, because it will ensure you get a good, honest pace. And people will be like, well, do you really, do the O'Brien camp really need a pace? Because obviously if they're going to keep Auguste Rodin up in the front end of the thing, look back to the Epsom Derby and then look at the Irish Derby. The Irish Derby, they had a very strong, nice pace going on at the front, obviously with Adelaide River and, apologies, the ill-fated horse, I can't remember off the top of my head. Both of those two were going away with the pace, and there was going to be a nice strong pace. And then obviously the poor horse had an issue, and then the pace just disappeared, and suddenly Auguste Rodin found himself in front. Whereas you look at the Epsom Derby, those front two, they absolutely poured it on up the front, and it set it up beautifully for him. So I think there will be at least one pacemaker in here. It's just working out who he is. And obviously, again, going back to that, 100 to 1, that's his price. I don't see him. I'd be shocked if he's featuring, even in the places. Bolshoi Ballet, I remember having him at 25 to 1 for the Epsom Derby, and he was sent off about 11 to 8, I think, in the end. And he was poor there, and I've never really looked at him and thought he's any better than that. He's been tried at a few different trips, finished 8 lengths behind Emily Dickinson and Heavy Ground on return. And this year, you look at his next third to Ascot. Yeah, that's not bad form. But then you look, he's finishing second behind Royal Champion in a listed race at Royal Ascot. So on that, you'd think, okay, if he's bringing him along steadily, that's not too bad. But at the end of the day, to go from finishing second to Royal Champion in a listed race to then winning a Group 1, because this isn't just any Group 1, this is a Group 1 absolutely smothered with depth. So for me, again, Balshoi Ballet, again, just like Broome, because he stayed further, he may well just be put in there as a pacemaker. His realistic chance of winning this, not for me. So that's knocked 4 of the 15 off so far. Simca Mile. So Simca Mile is the French raider. They've made it quite clear that this is going to be this will be travelling. Obviously, he's not 100% guaranteed, but they have said this is the intentions. And Christopher Soumillon is booked, jocked up on him currently. So basically, the bottom line with this, the form goes back and forth with Erezine. Erezine's a very good French horse, and this horse finished in front of both Babe Ridge and Verdani. That it was a prep for both those two horses, whereas Simca Mile knew the score. I don't think, in fact, I'll just double check this. Yeah, Simca Mile had a run, so had race fitness on the side. Has similar RPRs to a few of these, so like 119, 118, so is there or thereabouts. But you look at the top level, so obviously I'm looking at what you need to win this sort of race, and I'll just quickly flick through some of the stats. I have done a bit of research for this, and you look at the stats, and you're looking at 125. Highland Real won it with a 121 performance, but since then you're looking at 124, 125 minimum. So this horse needs to find at least £6 of improvement. And whilst I'm not saying that that's not possible, because the horse has only had 9 runs, it's just the fact that they have to find it. Big price though, so nothing to say that won't. But again, even looking at through that form line, if you look at the form of like Bay Bridge, say that horse beating Bay Bridge, and Bay Bridge was on a prep as well, very, very, very keen on the day, tongue hanging out, the whole works, couldn't have done much more wrong. And Luxembourg's only 5 points shorter, and obviously Luxembourg beat Bay Bridge as well. So I mean, of the two, I'd prefer to be on the Luxembourg side. So Simca Mile, obviously, I'm not saying at a big price, wouldn't surprise me, obviously, if not featured, but like came in, say, the top 5. I'd be surprised though if it was good enough to win this sort of event. Jovial Legend. I have done a bit of research for these, so I don't want to just throw it all away. Yeah, Jovial Legend. My simple explanation for this was a top class handicapper, 4th in the Melbourne Cup, 4th behind Power Driver. That sort of form, like I question even winning the Hardwick isn't that great a form, let alone getting beaten the Hardwick, and obviously finishing 4th, 2 3/4 lengths behind Power Driver. And whilst obviously the horse would have needed fitness, if it was to win this sort of race, like you can kiss all your handicaps goodbye if you're aiming, because this horse has looked like a horse that's aimed to be winning big handicaps, whether it's in the UK or abroad. But the colours and the connections, they like to travel. Hence the 4th in the Melbourne Cup, and something like that. It wouldn't surprise me if that's the plan again, to go down under and do 2 runs out there. You don't really want to be, well, if you win this, obviously, of course you do, but you don't really want to be finishing close up if you're not going to get the result you want. So for me, I think he's top class, but he's a top class handicapper, and this is a level above him. Adelaide River. So Adelaide River, I'm doing this from an unbiased, so I'll speak about any bets that I've had at the end. But Adelaide River I thought was very interesting as a dark horse, more of a long shot. So again, sat in there around the 25s, I think 33 to 1 currently mark. Form last year doesn't amount to much, beaten 6 lengths by Arrest, 6 lengths by Dubai Mile. But this year obviously was used as a pacemaker when well beaten by August Rodin. Apologies, 2 seconds. Yeah, used by a pacemaker, used as a pacemaker, well beaten by August Rodin. However, that time didn't handle the camber at Epsom whatsoever, and it was almost like a throw in the towel. My job is done. However, when running at Ireland, and I thought this could be the case because obviously when it was a small field, there's only 8 or 9 runners. You had a feeling that there could be a little bit of an upturn with the O'Brien stealing the race a bit. And obviously with all the issues that happened in behind, like with the unfortunate ill-fated San Antonio in behind, the race turned into a bit of a mess, and this horse ended up on a freebie out in front. And there was a lot of controversy about how good this horse was. Should it have gone past August Rodin? And I'm not being funny, if you swap the jockeys and you had, let's put it this way, you go back to the Brian Cooper, Davy Russell in the Cheltenham cross country, and like it was almost like that, but the difference would have been Brian Cooper takes a pull and lets Davey win on Tiger Roll. I'm not saying that either way, like as in it's just from what the eye looked at. A lot of people were saying obviously August Rodin idled and loads of other things, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. But the reason I thought that he was very interesting was because maybe he is, well, he clearly is at a much better level than what we had seen so far. I mean, a 1 length beating, so he's, and then obviously 4 lengths back to Covent Garden. So the question mark was next time out, will he replicate that or was it just a complete fluke? Everyone's still knocking August Rodin, saying like he was awful in the thing, and we'll get to him later on. But Adelaide River then went on to finish second behind Feed the Flame, and everyone's like, yeah, but he's got beat. Yeah, well, two things. One, he got well back late on, and two, he's gotten beat by Feed the Flame 1 length. Feed the Flame looked very good on the day. Could be an arc horse, could a 10 furlong horse, and was has only been beaten by Ace Impact in that time. And that was a 1-2-3 RPR for Feed the Flame. It was a very, very high level performance. And if you're looking behind, it's none other than the Oaks winner, Soul Sister, who's that's no poor horse, if that makes sense. Given her £3, she did end up in a bit of a mess of a race, but at the same time, he did it easily enough to stay in front of her. And I think as a dark horse outsider, he's not a bad horse to have on side. The only question mark you would say is, will he end up as a pacemaker again? For me personally, I don't think he will, because as I've mentioned further down with the likes of Brooms and the Bolshoi Ballets, who have stayed further, it wouldn't surprise me if Adelaide River is up there, but one of those is doing the donkey work, and Adelaide River's just there. And if I'm not saying that if he was gone, then Adelaide River would take it up, but that is more than likely what it would. Basically, obviously, they'd be more than happy that if they sacrifice one by one, as in you do the stamina for the first part. But I think Adelaide River's an interesting one and will be underrated because again, you're talking about Simca Mile running to like say 120 RPR. So Adelaide River's exactly the same. That was a career best last time out over in France, and that's been completely underplayed. And if the race didn't have so much depth, then I'd understand him being a fair bet to obviously, well, not so much beat the elders, but like as in to be in amongst it. Like you might get 4 or 5 places in this on the day, even 3 places. It wouldn't surprise me if he goes close. I don't think he's probably got the class to win it, but the difference is as well is going back to Simca Mile. Obviously, Simca Mile career best, talking about him coming over 119 RPR. So Adelaide River achieved a 120 RPR, so £1 better. But the difference is Adelaide River's a 3-year-old. So Adelaide River is getting £11 from his elders. So would get £11 from Simca Mile. So that gives Simca Mile £12 to make up on Adelaide River. To put that in simple terms, that's a fair few lengths. So I just think as a dark horse, interesting. On to Westover. Westover obviously second to Desert Crown. Then went on to win the Irish Derby, which was a very weak race, but at the same time, you can only beat what's put in front of you, and he absolutely bolted up that day. He then went on, and he just seems to either be all in or all out, because he then went on and he came second to Equinox in Maidan. In a race, I think he has to have very specific conditions, which is why it was so... best way of phrasing it. It was strange that Connections only just decided in the last race, so the last French race, to run a pacemaker. A lot of these other races, like the Coronation Cup when he's beat by Emily Upjohn, they don't put a pacemaker in. He needs pace continuously in for his stamina to come through. He doesn't want it to turn into a sprint like he did with Emily Upjohn. And obviously, it's not that he's a bad horse. He just needs very, very specific conditions. I also think that they missed a trick, and they know they did, because if it was in a bigger yard, he would have gone to the St. Leger because they'd have had other horses. But because it was those connections and the yard and what they had at the time, they wanted to aim him at the more prestigious races, and I think it cost them last year. I'm not saying he would have won the St. Leger, but he would have obviously... I think he's a St. Leger horse. So what else can I tell you about Westover? Obviously second to Emily Upjohn. When staying on, but he was well beaten by her turn of foot. He won an egg and spoon race in France last time out. I say an egg and spoon race. I mean, it was still it was still a Group 1, but it was just a very well placed Group 1 because he beat Zagre, who he'd already beaten, and obviously they had a pacemaker in there. But he still made hard enough work of it before getting on top in the end. Me personally, as I've stated, I think he needs a very exceptional set of circumstances. And it's not like, in order to bring his stamina in, it's not like you're looking for very heavy ground, because I think that's what many thought he would want when he was sent off 10-1 in the Arc, but he was beaten 7 lengths plus in that. So normally I'd say, yeah, but that's beaten 7 lengths plus in an arc, and obviously only beaten 3 lengths by Equinox in over in Maidan in the Shima Classic. That's form that would put you close in here. But again, going back to this race is so heavy in depth that you're going to need more than just that. And again, because he's older, he has to give £11 to the younger horses. So I'm not saying he can't win it. I just think he wants a longer trip. He doesn't want to see a turn of foot, and I could see this easily turning into a race where there's going to be pace on because, as I said, with the O'Brien horses, but you're going to need a good turn of foot. You're not going to be messing around. It wouldn't surprise me. If he gets remotely blocked in any way in this race, we know he doesn't have the speed to get out of it. We saw it in the Derby with Desert Crown, and we've seen it since with Emily Upjohn when Frankie hit the go, and Rob Hornby turned around and was like, "Oh no, I should have been doing that." Like a few seconds ago. No reflection on his ride because I don't think that affected it whatsoever. But that's just my opinion on Westover. So I'm not saying he can't win, but I personally don't think he will win because I don't think he's going to get that sort of setup here. And he might be staying on for places, but again, I think he's got to go some to get in places with these sort of horses. He's got the numbers to match, but he's just a very unique sort of horse. And by unique, you could say like boat like Santini, quite slow. Right, so on to Luxembourg. Luxembourg's become quite the forgotten horse, and he is the absolute Marmite horse. There's no in between with Luxembourg. He is Mr. Marmite in the fact that he either runs an absolute screamer or he just does not turn up. And what I mean by that is you look through some of his form, and I know that the comments afterwards when he was beaten by visualization, sent off at 10 to 11, he was only beaten 3.5 lengths, but he was so lackluster. People were saying that they were like, I'm not sure that horse is ever going to win another race, let alone a Group 1. And then obviously the Aidan O'Brien trick comes out, and next time he absolutely hacks up. Not hacks up as in distance, but to come on that sort of distance. To put it in simple terms, he achieved a £15 difference in RPR between run to run, and the difference in those two runs was 27 days. I mean, that's the genius of O'Brien. That to me says that he went there, he was undercooked, he knew what he had, they knew how they wanted to ride him, and then bang, next time, Baybridge, Verdani wasn't even in the screenshot. They absolutely obliterated him. And then obviously he was sent off. He was training between 5 to 2 the night before, 6 to 4 just before, 2 to 1 he finished at for the Ascot for the St James's Palace, Prince of Wales Stakes. Obviously St James's, but it's a 3-year-old Prince of Wales Stakes, where he was absolutely smashed by Mush to death. He ran his race, like as in, well, in my opinion, I think he ran his race. I don't think he was helped by the US Raider, which I don't understand why he was even there. He literally was there to just pester the horse. It was like someone had gone in there just to annoy O'Brien. Because I mean, where did that American horse come? 18 lengths behind in 6th. Like he literally just pestered the horse. But at the same time, he was beaten on merit well and truly by Mustardaf. It was a monstrous performance. But that doesn't stop this horse being better than, as in going back to his champion stakes. Again, if he's on one of his going days, his 124 RPR, as I mentioned at the start, that would put him there or thereabouts for his to be in amongst all of the rest of these. And you look at how many runs he's had, he's still only had 10 runs, 6 wins. So he's fairly unexposed. And obviously you look at the quick flick, and he hasn't even raced at this trip. He's raced at this trip once, and that was in the Arc when finishing pretty much on top of Westover, if I've read that right. Yeah, him and Westover finished pretty much on top of each other. Westover finished just in front of him. So the problem is with Luxembourg, again, as I've said, is I think he's a good horse, and obviously he's quite versatile. I think he'll be ridden prominently. Is he has to give the weight to the younger horses. So I mean, he achieved his 124 RPR, was a career best in the Irish Stakes, which matched his what was that race? So it was the Tatterstall's Gold Cup. Sorry, that I was talking about, and then last year was the Irish Champion Stakes, so both of those two are his career high RPR. So 124 RPR each time, and you look through, there's a couple of winners in the last 10 years that have achieved that sort of number. So it's not unfathomable that he could go close. And at 20 to 1, you could argue he's a big price. But at the same time, I'd imagine the O'Brien yard know exactly where they stand with their pecking order now. They've had not just horses that they've had for a while, but they've had say 3 or 4 runs this season. And obviously Ryan Moore's selection and Shami Heffernan's selection is probably going to give you a pretty big clue towards which way they think. So onto the business end. So for those that didn't want to watch all the bigger priced horses, this is where we're at the shorter end of the market. We are at the top one, two, three, four, five, the top six in the market. So basically everything from 8 to 1 down. So first up, we've got Power Driver. So Power Driver is the horse that I think he's got a great following, mainly for the love of the horse, the love of the trainer, and love of everything around him, rather than the fact of him being like an absolute superstar. This is my own personal view, and obviously, as I said, I'm not going to sit on the fence and say, yeah, I think this horse is this. Going to Pile Driver, firstly, they were talking about obviously Ascot. They turned up. This is why it's such a struggle for us as punters to win money on the flat. When you've got the trainer on things like ITV and then reiterating on Racing UK and then reiterating for the race, oh, he's 75-80%, he's going to be gassing and stuff like that, he's going to need it. And everything that trainer said was true. He did need everything about it. The issue was he was racing horses that were like £12 inferior of him. Have I got any of the stats? Yeah, so he was racing horses. So like West Wind Blows was, I don't know, £11 inferior of him. Yeah, 124, 111. So £13 inferior of him. So it just puts your mind, you're like, well, you don't want to. Different trainers have their horses, when they say 80% fit, they run them in different ways. Like Willie Mullins or Aidan O'Brien, chances are, if they're 80% fit, they'll go off from the front and they'll run until their stamina runs out and they'll just ride them out and be like, okay, fourth or fifth. Or they'll ride them out the back and then they'll just. Whereas Pile Driver was in amongst it from the off and he just stayed there and he beat. But I just think that Group 2, winning a Group 2 Hardwick is not the level of this. People will be shouting at the screen, yeah, we totally get that. But obviously last year he won the King George. Yes, he did. And so if I flick back to his last year's performance, which I'm finding very difficult to find, it's there. That was a career best 125 RPR. Again, going back to the numbers, so like I just said with Luxembourg would only need to achieve a pound on a standard King George. Obviously, I'm hoping this is going to be an exceptional, like a Enable, Crystal Ocean, like a 128 plus sort of performance to win this race. And that's 100% true. But you look back to that level, and they've rated him based on where he's beaten the horses. So he's given that RPR based on how far he's beaten the horses without taking any into consideration of what happened to the horse on the day. And if you actually look back to that race, and I remember it very, very well, both Westover and Emily Upjohn ran absolutely no race. Like, it's so hard to know what happened between them going from the paddocks to getting to the front to the stall. Like, Westover he was just berserk from the start, and Emily Upjohn didn't look too bad, but as soon as she got on, she pulled really hard. He took a really keen hold out in front, so it didn't matter where they were positioned in the race. Like, she was held up in the midfield, but she was still pulling like a train. And Westover was up the front, and he was going like a train. And both those two just said, "Oh, we've got no interest today," and they completely bottomed out they bottomed themselves out and finished fifth and sixth, so last and second last. Mischief was already past his best on the day, and Broome, who obviously I talked about, Broome was probably in there. Well, he was in there on his merit, but he was a big price on the day, and it wouldn't surprise me again, as I said, to use him as a pacemaker. So whilst I don't want to belittle the horse's achievements, because obviously that's a Group 1 and a brilliant race, I think there's plenty of reason that if you ran that exact same race, so if none of the other runners were in, and we ran that same King George again this Saturday, so with Emily Upjohn, and who did I say, with Westover, I find it very hard to believe that those two horses would finish fifth and sixth, beaten so far by Pile Driver. So, but going on to Pile Driver again, that was my last year. I don't want to be disrespectful about the horse, but obviously, even though he's 80% fit, how much did that take out of him? Like, when you send a horse 80% fit and they get a harder racing than bargained for, sometimes it takes a bit more out of him than you expect. But the bottom line is, as well, is like there's a lot of love for Pile Driver, sat in around 7 to 1. Is like Hookham demolished him at Epsom in the Coronation Cup in 2022, so obviously last year. And it wasn't like kind of beat him. He literally was on the bridle, on the snaff, going past him, and he just went past him like he was standing still. And there was no excuses there. They were both off they were level weights. So if Hookham runs his race, Pile Driver runs his race, and there's no reason to see that Hookham shouldn't be inconvenienced at all by Ascot, because I believe he's won at Ascot anyway. So it's hard to see how Pile Driver turns that around. So that's just me, just simple, just for the win perspective. Because obviously, when you get to 7 to 1 and lower, in reality, you're looking at the win perspective. And yeah, I am being harsh on certain horses, but otherwise, if you're not cutthroat, how are you going to whittle down a field of this sort of size? So Pile Driver for me, whilst I see the respect for him and that he won it last year, winning things like the Hardwick to then coming up to this, and I know they use that as a prep, and winning a prep, a Group 2 as a prep is very obviously very good. I just think he's meeting a much, much better field here. And even if a couple of them, like some will not run their race for whatever reason, others will. And I'm not saying I'd be shocked, but I just think he's going to find at least one or two better than him this year. Right then, so on to the top five. So the top five, we have Desert Crown. So Desert Crown, anyone who's followed me knows my love for Desert Crown. And I've had a lot of love for Desert Crown. I didn't have a lot of love for him when obviously I had the injury and all that sort of thing. Not obviously that doesn't really make sense, but more disappointment than not having love for the horse. It was a big payout on Derby Day last year, and I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten how big an achievement that was, and I can see why. Apologies. I can see exactly why it would be easy to see that achievement just washed away. But look at Passenger, who was electric in the Dante, bar the fact he didn't win. He finished third. He looked good and stuff like that. The Foxes, like all of those sort of horses, very inexperienced. Passenger, people were I think he was sent off about 5-1. They were like, oh yeah, he could win a derby and stuff, and he was nowhere to be sighted. So the reason why I reference that is because it just showed how difficult it is to win a derby on only your second run of the season, your third run of your career. And that is what Desert Crown did. And he didn't just do it, he absolutely demolished them. And he ran to a 125 that day. And I would just get the field up. Apologies. Just have a look. And bar one horse who was Golden Horn and another horse who was Australia. Australia ran to a 125. Golden Horn ran to a 127. Bar that, he ran the highest Derby figure in the last 10 renewals. So, and that's in amongst your beaten horses like the likes of Adayars and Harzans. So what I'm saying is it was a good level of performance. The form behind is questionable, I don't doubt that. Obviously Westover is a dual Group 1. Might have even had more than 2 Group 1s now under his name. Obviously because he won that French Group 1. He went on to win the Irish Derby after that. So the form is there. It isn't bad form in behind. But it wasn't about the form that day. It was about the visual. It was about how Stout spoke about him. Michael Stout is obviously he's been in this game for longer than anyone, and he knows when he's got a good horse and what sort of type it was. Leading into obviously his comeback, they said he's going to need it, and obviously he was still sent off 2-5 against Hookham in the 10 furlong Sandown. What was it called? I should know this. Brigadier Gerard. So Sandown, level weights, 10 furlongs. Right, I'm going to try not to be too critical because I don't like to be critical about anything and people in particular, but me personally, that was not very, but it was a poor ride. Regardless of whether you know the horse 80% or 100% fit. Richard Kingscott rode that as if he was, I don't want to use a classic on Frankel. He came down the outside and he was 3 wide. He had 2 options there. And I think in his head he thought, I'm going to win this easy. I don't even need to worry about 2 options. Obviously it's easy to me to say as an armchair critic, and I hold my hands up to that, and I will say, yeah, of course, I shouldn't be. But he had 2 options. Option 1 was look across to his right hand side, and Hookham is absolutely pocketed. There is no way Hookham is getting out if when he pulls alongside, he just sits there. He doesn't have to sit there for long, just a second or two, because it causes the rest of the horses to stay lined up, and then Hookham cannot get out. And it'd be a Jim Crowley. Jim Crowley gets often stuck in traffic. And then by the time Jim probably would have got out, if Desert Crown had gone, then he would have just rode him out to finish him behind, because he was come back from injury as well. So he would have won that race. Option 2 is he decided to go for the 3 wide, go for it and kick for home. He went past, swept by the field like it wasn't even there, including Hookham. However, once he hit the front, it was like in his head he thought, job done, don't want to give the horse a hard race. I'm not saying he stopped riding out, because that wasn't the case at all. It was the fact that if you go back to the Frankie Dettori ride and Emily Upjohn when they beat Westover, when Frankie goes past Westover, because she hits that, he didn't hit the front and then think, oh, I'm going to ease up a little bit or like slow. Like he gave it the full hammer and tongs, and that's exactly what. If I think once he'd gone past, if he'd just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, it was like he slowed the horse's momentum, and then when he tried to get him going again, it was too late. Hookham went past him. Again, that's me obviously being hypercritical, but this is the way you have to do it if you've got so many runners that you're trying to break down. So that's an easy to forgive, personally, an easy to forgive race. Obviously, over 2 furlongs shorter than what the Derby trip was, 2 furlongs shorter than what was on Saturday. Um, but unfortunately, you can turn around and say to me, "Oh, he didn't do that. Hookham would have won." Blah blah blah. Totally understand that. But there's a reason Richard Kingscott, unfortunately, like last year, I thought he was really up and coming, and the jockey world is horrible. It really is horrible, and he was up and coming because every chance he got, he was grabbing it and taking it. And he had a spate of about 3 weeks with the likes of Passenger in the Dante. Obviously, this situation. There was another Astro King over at York. And depending on how big the connections are, they're not the forgiving type. And you could say to me, "Oh well, it wasn't Kingscott's fault," and they would have thought that was a perfect ride. But why has Kingscott gone from riding the horse the last 4 times, and now they went for Frankie Dettori, and now they know Frankie's got a mount in this, and now they're looking for another jockey booking, which sounds like it's going to be William Buick. So that's how savage the jockey ship world is. Me personally, Desert Crown is quite simple. This is his acid test. Like, he has got to be going close if he is anything like what the connections have described him as, what we saw him as in the Derby, the way that we're getting these work throws. 1 minute he's working like Frankel, next minute he's not working at all because he's out of Ascot. He was destroyed in the betting when Frankie was announced as riding. He went from 11-2 into 7-4 in about 36 hours, up against the likes of Luxembourg. Like, you look back at that race, and in reality, if he'd beaten Mostadaf, that would have been an absolutely monstrous performance. But we never saw it, and we don't know where he would have fared in that race. So he comes here. He's clearly a very good workhorse when he's on his day, but he's clearly very temperamental, of either fragile or getting everything in on the day. I think they'll have little excuse here. They've had 2 months to prepare. They said there was no sort of issue. It was just that he wasn't at his 110% and they've run out of time for Ascot. So they've prepared him for here. They've got exact same conditions, 12 furlongs. They are taking on the 3-year-olds, though, not just the older horses today. But this is his acid test. And me personally, unless he's beaten by the 3-year-olds because he's given £11 to them, so the likes of King of Steel, Adelaide Rivers, and in reality, King of Steel and August Rodin, he has got to be going close, or he is not what we all expected. I backed him for the Arc start of the year, and I still hold that slip. I'm not against that. He's probably a bigger price than what I backed him at, because obviously he got beat by Hookham. But as I've said, there were plenty of reasons for the excuses for that. And I think with William Buick in the saddle, he is a horse that has that push button. So as I was saying, if he can stay in contention, if he can find the gaps, and if he comes down, if he's still on the bridle coming around the bend, he is one that when they push that button, we know he's got to turn a foot. It's just going to be pushing the button at the correct time. So I'm not ruling Desert Crown out, but I do think that come Saturday evening, if Desert Crown's finished 6th or 7th, we won't be surprised. But you have to say things like the Arc are long gone. But at the same time, if you're saying Desert Crown's won this by a couple of lengths, again, I wouldn't be surprised either. So this for me is his big D-Day. Right then, try and keep the others a bit shorter. Emily Upjohn, I'm not going to go too much into Emily. She ran no race in this last year, as I said, completely boiled over and Westover. She's changed since then. She ran 2 races with the hood, won both of those. She didn't have the hood on last time when she raced behind Paddington, but she still ran, I think did she run a career best? She ran an equal career best to the Coronation Stakes, so the hood's now becoming effective in the fact that she doesn't actually require it. She's become a much more settled horse. She'll have her chance. She'll get her allowances, but if she wins this, then Paddington's going to look like an absolute monster. I just think there could be 1 or 2 that are as good as her. She has got that electric turn of foot. And again, much like Desert Crown, like if she stays in the race and she can feature in the race, when Frankie peels her out like in the Coronation Stakes, then obviously she'll have a chance. But peeling her out against the likes of a King of Steel and August Rodin and Desert Crown, compared to pinging her out in the likes of a Westover, who again I said is a pretty stamina-laden horse, I think they're like chalk and cheese. So she has a chance. I'm not going to stand there and knock her. The money may well come for her to an extent, just because Frankie Dettori's on her for John Gosden. Have I got anything else? She was beaten by Paddington, but it was a mess of a race. But best horse won on the day, but she was given stacks of weight. But again, she's given stacks of weight here to the front of the market. So we'll just have to wait and see. It wouldn't surprise me if a 3-year-old was better than her. Like, I'm not saying she can't win. She's just, for me, she's like a mare horse. Like, if she won, I'd probably question, does that mean that's as good as this bunch are? I want to see a horse. If a horse wins this race, especially if they win it in the manner of, say, a Mushtadaf did at Royal Ascot, where he obliterates his field, they're going to be favourite for every middle distance race between now and the end of the year. So things like the Arc and etc., everything. And I want to see something like that. But we might not see that. We might see three or four of them in a head bob come in the end. Someone gets stuck in a pocket, etc. You have no idea. But for me, Emily Upjohn is what I'd call a meh horse, in the fact that if she wins, I wouldn't think this King George is, not saying it's as good as I thought it was. It's just the fact that some of the horses aren't as good as I thought they may have been. She might still be, obviously, going back to the amount of runs she's had. She has only had 7 runs, so she could have stacks. And I know they've been talking about her being an Arc horse. She's ran to RPRs of 1, 2, 3 with her allowance. That puts her bang there to be there or thereabouts. But does she look like an Enable? Not to me personally. Enable would have ate Paddington for breakfast. Controversial. Right then, so on to the front of market, the final 3, and obviously where you'd think the money would be. And they're all the same price at the bookmakers I'm currently looking at, best odds. They're all 4 to 1. And the one I'm going to speak about first is Hookham. Hookham, why are you there at 4 to 1? I do not know. This to me is the worst, not the worst, I'm not going to say the worst price at the front end. If you took the 8 to 1 about Hookham probably 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, absolutely brilliant price, as in fair price. I think Hookham should be around the maybe 6 to 1 price. But I look across Odds Checker, let me just flick across the Odds Checker, and Hookham is actually like, I saw the bookmakers write on Sunday, said he could be vying for favouritism, and I thought, you have got to be joking me. And I look at it now and post obviously entries, Hookham is sat there 7 to 2 with quite a few bookmakers, 4s in places, and that is shorter than both King of Steel and August Rodin in places. What on earth am I missing here? I do not get it whatsoever. I totally appreciate Hookham's form. I just don't get this whole rain, this rain situation. Like Hookham, I'm going to go across to my notes. I know it's unlike me to have actually wrote any study. Hookham, right, let me just read this so simply. Hookham with soft in the ground is 2 for 3. And he lost on soft ground at Ascot, at Royal Ascot in the Hardwick, so a Group 2, 2021. So 2 years ago he was getting beaten at Hardwick on soft ground. Why the rain has become such a big thing for Hookham, I just do not understand. His last 2 runs, one over 10 furlongs, one over 12 furlongs, were both his 2 best runs, his 2 career bests, both on good ground. Connections have never stated at any point that he needs like soft or heavy ground or anything like that. And this is what I really don't understand, because again, if I just bring it up, apologies, this is poor from me. So if I just bring this up, so obviously going on to that, so his best form is on good, not soft, not so. All they said was they want ground that's not rattling quick like Royal Ascot was in order to run him. So, but as well, on the negative side, like there's a lot of horses here that are getting overpriced, like August Rodin, King of, all of these are getting pushed out because Hookham's going in. August Rodin won on soft and heavy ground. King of Steel has won on soft ground. Emily's won on good to soft, which is likely to be, not ran on worst. Desert Crown has won on soft ground. Hookham, as I said, is 2 for 3 on soft ground, but his faster is on his best form's on good. Where's this gamble coming from? I don't understand it. He's got the form. So if you go through the actual form, he's got form to feature in this race. To obviously the extent of, like, as in I would not be shocked if he won the race, but I don't get his price. Like, he should be 6 to 1 minimum. But at the same time, if you'd had no PR, so no chat whatsoever, and say we had 48-hour decks and this was the exact field, and we'd had no chat about Hookham whatsoever since Royal Ascot, him not being run it, and he was declared, if he was priced up between 8 and 10 to 1, no one would be batting an eyelid. They'd say it's probably a fair price. Probably, I'd say if you're getting 10 to 1, that's a good price. But I think this horse probably could be 6 or 7 to 1. Vying in for favouritism between 3 to 1 and 7 to 2 against 3-year-olds that you have to give £13 to, £2, £11 to. She's got to give £11 to. And if it comes up soft, like heavy soft, there's other horses in here that have got better form or are more proven than he is. So it's just really blown my mind, to be honest. So again, I'm not saying Hookham can't win, but let's just have a little quick run through Hookham's form. So Hookham last year in March finished behind Piledriver. He then came back in June, obviously 2022, in the Coronation, and he absolutely, as I mentioned earlier, he smashed Piledriver. He really did win so well on the bridle, and maybe with age he's getting better, with less racing, more gaps, and he's getting better later on. He's got a good record, obviously 9 wins from 14, and as I said, his last two career bests have both been on good ground. First beating Piledriver and then beating Desert Crown. What price would Hookham be if Richard Kingscott had and Desert Crown they had beaten Hookham? Obviously, Desert Crown's a bigger price, but Desert Crown was sent off 2-5 to beat Hookham that day. Hookham was sent off 5-1, and now Hookham's half the price of Desert Crown and vying for favouritism against two horses of which August Rodin's won both derbies, English and Irish. King of Steel's finished second in the English derby and then won at Royal Ascot, albeit obviously a Group 2 or Group 3. Yeah, Group 2. And they both get £11 from him. So I don't get it. And I look through some of his form, and I do think you look at it and he is very unexposed, with regards when he has a break. He does come here like as in top form, but it wasn't long ago. It was only 6 runs ago. That was 2021. So obviously it was September 2021. So you're looking at around 2 years ago, that he was getting beaten by Hamish. So I don't know. I don't get it. I'm not saying obviously he should be a 50-1 shot or whatever. I'm not saying that he can't win the race. He should just not be anywhere near favourite against the likes of an August Rodin or King of Steel. The people who have backed this horse, if obviously they're shrewd or whatever, they've backed this horse at prices like 8-1 or bigger. They've not come in and they've not started smacking this at 3-1 and 7-2. I just don't get it. And honestly, I don't get the whole bookmaker PR thing. It's like no one's looked at the form book and said, oh yeah, like where are you getting every day? Like I see the bookmakers comment on it. They're like, oh, the money's flowing in for Hookham because of the rain. Like, why? Why? I don't get it. I understand, because if it's the rain, because that means he's going to participate in the race. That makes total sense to me. But he doesn't want rain. He wants the ground to be good, or maybe exactly what it is now. Good to soft. The connections will be like, bang, let's go. But going back to, as I said earlier, 125 RPR. So we look through, and that would win him. He would win maybe, let's have a little quick look. A 125 RPR, which is what he ran against Desert Crown. That would put him tied with last year's winner, Piledriver. And that would maybe win him. He'd win 5 of 10 on his last renewal, on a standard renewal. But as I've said again, time and time again, this is better than standard renewal. So quite simply for Hookham, it's just a massive no at the prices. Like, I mean, I really don't know what will happen with Hookham. I could see him drifting big time after Dex, and him, not big time as in huge price, but like him going to what you'd expect to be, like say 6-1, something like that, or even a little bit bigger. Or the way they just keep pumping and pumping and pumping him, he could end up like 5-2. I don't get it. If the front two run their races and he runs his, because just to put it in simple context, he's run to a 125 RPR, 124 RPR. So, but you look at King of Steel and August Rodin. King of Steel ran to 122 in the Derby. August Rodin ran to a 124. They get £9 off Hookham. So they've ran to £1 less than his career best, which was against, well, August Rodin ran to £1 less than what Hookham, and he's getting £11. So that gives August Rodin £10 on him and King of Steel £8 on him, which is the equivalent of lengths. So, I mean, it could be experience, could be anything. Hookham, obviously, they talk about him being a better horse as a 6-year-old. That may well be the case, because obviously his last 2 runs he's been very good. But the whole rain situation, that is not why this horse should not be near the front of the market, because of the weather. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. So for that, just because of his pure price, I just cannot have him whatsoever. If he wins, I'll take it on the chin, because he's the wrong price. He's a bet if he's 8-1 or bigger. At 3-1, 7-2, vying with the 2-3-year-olds, that's just a no. So again, if you got bored and you're looking for the final two are now, and that is the 2-3-year-olds, August Rodin and King of Steel. Quite easily to do both at the same time or similar, because they obviously correlate with each other. So King of Steel was actually shorter and was favourite for this at the start of the week, before the decks come out or the entries come out and we started seeing the numbers. He was actually 5-2 for this. until they saw the amount of horses that were going to run. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's a similar price after Dex, providing the other big guns stand their ground. Um, the thing with King of Steel is it's easy to forget how badly he was beaten by August Rodin because of the recency bias of how well he won at Royal Ascot. He was brilliant at Royal Ascot. There is no question about it. But I remember on the day, and I remember seeing a lot, reading a lot about it. Was a lot of people were worried about the bounce, having had such a long time off, and then obviously going to Derby, running a monster race, and then going and then bouncing at Royal Ascot. That they were thinking, oh, he could do this, he could do that, and obviously he didn't. And the reason a lot of people backed him, and he obviously got backed in on the day, he went all the way down to evens, and he was odds on at one stage, is because the race, the actual race itself, was poor. There was not a lot in there to beat him. Like he had £10 on continuous on ratings. He had £16 on Artistic Star, who finished second and third, and Arrest. I mean, Arrest. That's got to be one of the biggest hype horses of this season. He's been beaten left, right, centre, and they keep saying, "Oh yeah, he needs soft ground." Well, why is he turning up on Good to Firm at Royal Ascot? And more to the point, why is he getting sent off at 3-1 on Good to Firm at Royal Ascot after he ran no race in the Derby? So that King of Steel performance was brilliant in visuals and what we saw and the way he did it and stuff, but it wasn't very polished. And what I mean by that is like you could tell he was learning, he was hanging, he may have been smooth in getting there, but he was keen in parts of the races. He hung when he was going towards the front. He hampered rivals. Again, we go to France and he could have easily got booted out. Like there was plenty of reasons to think that he's not the full article, and he might not be the full article come this race on Saturday. But at the same time, he's got a lot of raw potential, and maybe he's improved since the Derby, and that's why he looked like this. But if you go on ratings, this performance that he's just done, even though it looked good visually, they were very average horses, and he actually achieved a £2 lower RPR than what he ran in the Derby. The Derby performance was massive, and I know Kevin Stott was disappointed when he got off, but I don't think how he rode that horse, like he rode it in any sort of negative way. That was a very good ride. He just got beaten by August Rodin, was absolutely phenomenal on the day. And it's easy to forget that August Rodin's not just beat him there, and he was sent off 66-1 for the Derby there, King of Steel, but August Rodin beat him 9 3/4 lengths last year, albeit he was for a different trainer, so very different situation, different circumstances. And obviously this is only his third start for Roger Varian, fifth start total, so he's very unexposed. I have very little to knock King of Steel with, and he's not worrying about the ground at all. I know he was very poor on heavy ground at the end of last year, but it was a different trainer. I can't see it getting worse than soft. So if he gets anywhere from good to firm to soft ground, you know he handles Ascot, you know he handles 12 furlong. He is a massive player. He gets £11 from the majority of the field, other than his other 3-year-olds. And I think he's a huge player. But obviously you don't need me to tell you that, because that's why he's there at 4-1. And then finally on August Rodin. So August Rodin, obviously, he's been in a bit of a yo-yo with the fact that he flopped in the 2000 Guineas on return, but it was just one of those races. It is what it is. We don't know how O'Brien had him, whether they just said no. And a lot of people wrote him off after that. But he was phenomenal last year as a 2-year-old. Obviously, just like bang, bang, bang. I think, was it 3 for 3? 1, 2, 3. No, 3 for 4. He got beat by Crypto Force on debut. Then he never looked back since. Finishing in, there was the Futurity. Yeah, Futurity won on his final start. Absolutely nothing to knock August Rodin with. He was absolutely electric in the Derby. There was no complaint there. Like it was, Ryan Moore seemed to know exactly, like, as in it was like, I know I'm going to get to you. It's just when I do. And like obviously I had my money down. I was thinking, I hope Ryan knows he's going to get there, because he gave him plenty of do. He gave King of Steel plenty of run at him. If August Rodin turns up in that Epsom sort of fitness stage, then like I think he is the one to beat. And at 4-1, he's a fantastic bet, because he's getting £11 from the majority of the field. He's got to maintain form with King of Steel, who's the second best 3-year-old on form so far. And then the rest have got to give him £11. If he runs to his 124 RPR, that means the rest of the field, obviously it doesn't work on ratings, but they'd have to run to like a 135, and that's just not physically possible. The question for me is, this will be his fourth run, not in a short period, but he's had some heavy races. Like, although he did nothing in the 2000 Guineas, it was on bottomless ground and an unenjoyable. And I don't know what happened last time with Adelaide River. So here's a few things that I've just wrote a few question marks of. I can't read how O'Brien does it, and this is why I enjoy the National Hunt more on the punting side of things than trying to work out the puzzles, because of the fact that I know why Paul Nicholls is had this horse at 70%. He isn't going to turn up to a Betfair Chase at 80%. He isn't going to do this. Whereas you get horses like I mentioned with Pile Driver, they're happy to go to big events like Royal Ascot at 80%. You aren't going to get Paul Nicholls going to like a Champion Hurdle or whatever saying, oh yeah, he's only at 80%. Punchestown will be his aim. So anyway, back to the thingy. These are my theories of what could have happened with August Rodin. Firstly, obviously, he hit the front too soon. That could have been the situation. Secondly, maybe he did get lucky with the whole jockey situation in that he wasn't on a going day and he still won despite his class, or maybe Adelaide River was not given the hardest of rides. But things to caveat that with, you have got no idea what O'Brien's plan was. Aidan O'Brien may have looked at the Irish Derby and thought, I'm not saying he let him off completely, he may have thought he has had a mother and father of a race in the Epsom Derby. We need to ease off him a little bit, let him have a little bit of a breather and then go again. And so maybe he didn't have much work. Maybe he had light work for that 4 weeks between those two events, and he was actually more undercooked than they expect. So that is one. The other is obviously he hit the front. Did he idle? And obviously maybe Ryan thought, oh, he's always doing enough. The question mark was, like, as in, if Adelaide River had gone past, would he have found more? And the third one is, was he feeling Epsom still? As I said, that performance at the Derby was like Desert Crown, but probably against it. Probably work well. It's working out in better form already, because obviously the 7th one as well at Royal Ascot. So I think that he was that good that maybe a month later was just not enough recovery time. Like if he'd skipped that race and he'd come straight here, regardless of what King of Steel had done, August Rodin would be sat here probably 6-4, between 6-4 and 5-2, biggest price. Because they just said, yeah, but can you remember what he Epps and can you remember what he did to King of Steel and stuff like that? But again, going back to the Adelaide River form, yeah, he beat Adelaide River, and Adelaide River's then gone and placed in France, beating the Oaks winner and finishing second behind Feed the Flame. That is very strong, solid form. It's just I know a lot of people questioned it, and it wasn't about the form; it was about the visuals of what we were watching, and we're thinking, what's going on here? This does not look like the same horse we saw in the Epsom Derby. So it's how much you trust O'Brien's getting back to the Epsom Derby form. The other thing as well with August Rodin is I wouldn't be taking a price till post Dex. He may be shorter post Dex, but I personally thought they'll want him to run in this race because they'll want, if they can get this on their CV, that is the season done. Whoever wins this race on their CV, like with regards breeding, everything, selling the horse or whatever, that this will be a phenomenal tick in the box. It's very difficult to pass up this. You're not coming at a 6 or 7 runner race. But originally they talked a lot about going straight to the Juddmonte. They know they're going to run into Moshadaf there. They have obviously other options if they wanted to step Paddington all the way up, but I don't think they're going to. But in reality, he looked like maybe he needed a bit of a freshen up, a little bit of a break, maybe give him 8 weeks off. But at the same time, what if they only sent him in 90% fit for the Irish Derby, and then now he's ready and he's going to be ready and roaring? So at the end of it, who are you to undermine Aidan O'Brien? Me personally, I don't undermine Aidan O'Brien. Right then, so let's get to the summary. So the summary, I've had 2 bets so far, and I haven't made any sort of hiding of those. I backed Adelaide River at 66-1 straight after the Irish Derby, just because I thought that form was probably going to be underplayed. This could have turned into a small field race. He could have been out in front. August Rodin might not have turned up, and he could have at least stole a place. And at 66-1 each way, I thought that was fair. This race is obviously littered with depth. Would I put anyone off that selection still now? No, but what would I do? I'd wait until Dex. 1, you can see if he's actually going to run. 2, you probably might well end up, because the bookies are going to be so focused on this race, could get 4, 5, 6 places, depending on how many horses. If there's 10 runners, you might still get 5 places each way, and he might be 33-1, he might be 50-1. So then you might be like, remember 50-1, obviously getting a place at 5th of the odds, that's a 10-1 winner. So that would be when I would be looking at that. The other horse I backed was Desert Crown each way at 16-1. That went up on my Twitter. Again, made no secret about that. Just as I've said, I'm not any less. I'd be more worried about whether he turns up. Providing he turns up and he's there at the start, it's probably going to be William Buick in the saddle. And as I've said, 16-1 for the acid test was more than fair. So obviously, if you haven't had a bet in it, what would my advice be? My advice at the moment in time would be not to back Hookham. And in reality, it just depends on the type of punter you are. Obviously, if you want to go for some of the long shots, again, wait till after the declarations. But some of these long shots, not all these horses are going to run their perfect race. So there might be the likes of an Adelaide River, a Westover, a Luxembourg that run into places, and they'll be sent off. They might be sent off 33-1, 40-1. If you're sent off 40-1, 5th of the odds, that's like the equivalent of, I think it's 7-1 or 8-1 winner. So you're getting good pays on each ways. So I wouldn't be rushing that. From the win purposes, if I'd had absolutely zero bets, I was going to Royal Ascot and this was the field tomorrow. I know it's very, very muggy, as they would call it. My two bets would be as simple as possible. Well, I say that actually because I'd probably have to cover. So if I was going to say simple as possible, it would be August Rodin and King of Steel, both at 4-1. If you're having the equivalent of a point on each of those, that's you getting 6-4 for either of those two 3-year-olds with the two best form coming into the race. But obviously everyone knows my bias, so that's from an unbiased opinion, but my biased love for Desert Crown, I wouldn't leave him behind. So if I was backing Desert Crown as well, it would then turn them probably into an even money shot, backing the three of them. Say Desert Crown's like 8-1 or something post decks. You'd end up putting half a point on him, and then that would give you even money for those three. They're the three I like the most in the race. Adelaide River will be my long shot, and they're the three I like most. Currently, I don't want to break down the difference between August Rodin and King of Steel until I see post decks. I don't want to stand there and say, I think this will win or I think this will win, and then one of the front two don't come. If one of the front two don't come, I think the other one will have a very outstanding chance. Especially if it's August Rodin that doesn't come, because I think King of Steel, although obviously we've got a lot of recency bias, he's got a lot of positives in his box in the fact that he didn't look lacklustre last time out. He's very unexposed. And if August Rodin doesn't turn up, he's getting £11 from this field. So as much as I haven't got a very, very formal conclusion, I think the bottom line is if you want to take the risk, then it's up to you. Like, as in, I think the biggest consideration that you've got to remember is the 3-year-old allowance. But just running through a quick few stats. So there's only been, even though that 3-year-old allowance is £11, there's only been 3 out of the last 10 winners have been 3-year-olds. Despite obviously that, and 2 of those 3 have been fillies. So obviously they're getting the fillies allowance and the 3-year-old allowance. So that's saying basically if you're just cutting out just the male horses, you're looking at, well, obviously take those 2 races away. So one of the last 8 has been a 3-year-old male horse, so like August Rodin, King Steel. So, but I do think this is a very different race. Normally you do not get this sort of quality. And like you look back at some of these clashes, you've got Enable versus Crystal Ocean versus Poet's Word. Like, these were epic clashes, like proper a neck separating them. But they were smaller fields, whereas this is littered with depth. So a few other stats: 8 out of 12 were not favourites, which obviously could be a negative to any of the front 3. But at the same time, that's still 33% were favourites. 10 out of 12 rated a 118 or above. So of the contenders, 118 or above, that literally knocks out pretty much nothing. The only ones not mentioned are Luxembourg and Adelaide River and August Rodin, but the chances are that's just because their ratings are not on here. They'd have the 118 anyway. And a negative towards King of Steel is that 10 of the last 12 were Group 1 winners. Obviously, he finished second in the Derby, but he hasn't got a Group 1 in his name. But a Group 2 minimum, obviously he picked up a Group 2. 12 of 12 of the Group 2 minimum. Negative against my mentioned Adelaide River, but obviously a positive for them. So I hope you've enjoyed. As I've said, sometimes it is just purely content. It's just a bit. The reason why I'm giving you this, because some people will say, yeah, but you haven't given me a proper conclusion. Like, I don't know who's going to win the race. I've provided you with a real easy short flow, whether you're on your way to work or sat just playing your PlayStation, listening in the background. And the most important thing, as I said last week, if you haven't watched the anti-post video, is that the peak time currently at the moment is on a Thursday. The declarations come in between. They'll start filtering through around 10 a.m. and then between about 11 and 2 p.m. the markets will float up. If you know exactly who you want to back, right, I know that I want to back King of Steel and I know I want to back August Rodin, and you've wrote down what price you are happy to back them at, then as soon as those markets go up, you're like, okay, that is way bigger than I thought. That is way bigger than I thought. I'm taking that price. And if you think, okay, actually maybe that is the wrong price or whatever, you can take half on a Saturday morning when you get best odds. Best odds is getting so pushed further down the line that come 10 a.m. Saturday morning, by the time you're taking them best odds, they've had 48 hours worth of markets. So your 4-1 is probably looking like 5-2, and you're like, yeah, but I've got best odds. How often do they drift all the way back out? And if you do want that, why not have half and half? So this is just my version of trying to condense everything as simple as possible. I know it's an hour video now, but to condense all of the form in the race so that you can try and have your opinion and know exactly come Thursday, this is who I want to back. And as I've said, King of Steel 4-1, August Rodin 4-1. I understand those prices. Hookham 4-1. I do not understand that price whatsoever. and hopefully Desert Crown will return to something like what we've seen in the past. So thank you. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe below. Likes are always appreciated. If you've got any feedback, then throw it up. As I've said, I'm not going to be putting a lot up. I don't know if I'll put anything up this weekend. I may do a short video, just a summary, close to the time once we've got decks. But it's all going to be video content for the next 6 weeks, if anything at all. So hope you enjoy your week, and thank you.